Good morning to all. Good morning also to the people on the podium. Thank you very much for coming. Today's session is about how to rally political support for the HIV response. During the past few days, I think many of us have been in sessions and have been dialoguing with people on what needs to be done to make sure that we have a world free of AIDS in 2030. And so the conversations are around, let me say, the medical aspects, the social aspects, but we also need to look into what is it that politicians need to do? What is actually the role of governments? My name is Lilian Ploemen. I'm the former Minister of Foreign Trade and Development Cooperation in the Netherlands. I am now a Member of Parliament. And I think that the role of governments is to make sure that we make an end to inequality. Because inequality is one of the root causes why there's still HIV, why people are still excluded and stigmatized. Others might think different about the role of governments, and that's why we have invited what we would call a distinguished panel, of course, and each of them will take a few minutes and speak to you on how they themselves see the role of governments and how they themselves have been able to rally political support from their different roles in relation to the HIV response. I'm going to briefly introduce them to you as they take the stage. We will have some questions and answers after all of them have made their statements. And of course, there's also an opportunity for you to pose your questions. You know how it works. There's a mic over there, and you need to have a question, and you need to be brief, and then we will be able to make sure that all of you who want to pose a question are able to do so. Again, good morning to all of you. Very nice to have you here. I'd like to invite Mrs. Helena Dalli to take the stage. Helena Dalli is the Minister for European Affairs and Equality of Malta. And I met her, I think, 2 years ago when we were in New York talking about same-sex marriages. And it was very important to have that session in the building of the United States, because it has been a subject that has been debated, that can be very polarized. And the Netherlands and Malta are part of a network where we want to foster dialogue. And Helena told us there how she has been able to push the issue in her country. And under her direction, the government of Malta has introduced several laws and policies to strengthen equality and human rights, placing Malta among the first in Europe in this area. She was the first Maltese nominee and winner of the European Diversity Award. Congratulations for her work in human rights and equality in her country, but also at the international level. And we thought she's very well positioned to talk to all of us about, as a minister, what has she been able to do? What were her dilemmas? How has she been able to push forward? And what can we learn from her excellent example? Helena, the floor is yours.
Good morning. I was asked to speak to you about how, as minister, I contributed to changing laws to protect same-sex relationships. Let me first say that I am not fully comfortable with the brief. The reason is that same-sex relationships do not require any particular protection. They occur naturally, have always been present and part of our societies. It is therefore discriminatory laws and policies that need to change. Our discriminatory culture that needs to change. Our discriminatory outlook needs to change. Our sense of the in-group and the out-group and the them and us mentality that needs to change. Otherwise, we will continue to protect some while leaving others behind. If we adopt this approach, same-sex relationships will then, like all other relationships, become fully part of normality, with no unnecessary distinction between them and the dominant heterosexual model. We need to have laws for couples, not for particular sexualities. So as I will tell you how we have changed laws and policies in Malta, I think that the takeaway from what I have to say is that we have addressed the discrimination inflicted on the lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, intersex and genderqueer population from an equality mainstreaming point of view. We are all born free and equal in dignity and rights, after all, as is clearly stated in the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. I became a minister responsible for civil liberties and equality in 2013. Then, Malta did not score high in the international scoreboards on LGBTIQ issues. We neither recognized same-sex couples, nor trans people, nor intersex people, or genderqueer people. The lack of recognition did not only impact LGBTIQ people when they sought that recognition, such as through marriage, but it impacted their daily lives as they were not legally equal to cisgender and heterosexual citizens. I was dead set to change that the minute I had the political power to do so. I thus set up an LGBTIQ consultative council composed of LGBTIQ civil society representatives and gave them the brief to propose laws and policies to government. The Civil Unions Bill that I proposed to Parliament in 2014 was indeed drafted by the members of this council. A key principle in that bill was that it was open to everyone equally. Indeed, it referred to two adult persons without any distinction in terms of sexuality and gender. We did this as we strongly believe that the community has within it the expertise needed to eradicate discrimination. Getting that law adopted was not easy, with opposition coming from conservative groups, the church, and the opposition party. The Prime Minister's support was therefore paramount in all this. Finally, though, we made it, which is what really counts. And on the night of the final vote, people gathered in front of Parliament to celebrate the progress that was voted into law that night. That win opened the door for further progress. By 2015, we had adopted the Gender Identity, Gender Expression and Sex Characteristics Act, which is often referred to as the standard in the field. And we also adopted the first LGBTIQ action plan with a number of far-reaching policy goals. Last year, following a general election won again by my party, the Prime Minister made it a point that the first law of the new legislature had to be the law on marriage equality. This time round, the legal exercise was that of removing all references to man and woman and husband and wife in the Marriage Act, and all laws that regulate marriage and the rights derived from it. In doing this, our goal is to ensure that all people, whatever their combination of personal characteristics, are treated equally. In the past 5 years, the sense that LGBTIQ people have of themselves and of their place in society has changed radically. The coming out age has gone down. Gays and lesbians present their partners, husbands or wives in society without asking themselves whether they should say friend instead, as was the case before. Trans people are more visible than ever and will shortly have access to various health services domestically with a dedicated gender affirmation clinic. But most of all, this legal change that we brought about resulted in greater attention to the particular circumstances of LGBTIQ people. One of those particular circumstances relates to the likelihood of HIV infection. It is with this in mind that the LGBTIQ Action Plan that will shortly be launched addresses the need to provide greater resources to implement best practices in the prevention, testing, and treatment of HIV infections through awareness raising, an improved condom distribution plan, widespread availability of self-testing kits, an improved pharmaceutical and psychotherapeutic treatment regime, and the introduction of free-of-charge PrEP and PEP. This is our story of change. It did not happen by accident, but by design. Government worked and continues to work hand in hand with LGBTIQ civil society to ensure that all are equal and that no one has to hide an element of themselves for fear that others may react negatively. This is good for equality and also, importantly, good for other areas such as HIV prevention. I thank you.
Helena, thank you very much. To me, I have to say, Helena is an example of what a politician and a minister should be. Take the opportunity of the position to really strive for change and not give up when there's a bit of resistance. So thank you very much for sharing your story, basically, your success. And I do hope that later on we have an opportunity also to talk a little bit more about, let me say, the difficulties that that you had on the way and how you overcame them. Thank you very much. Our next speaker comes from Ukraine. His name is Volodymyr Kopita, and he's the Director General of the Public Health Center of the Ministry of Health of Ukraine. And one of his achievements, and I think very relevant to the topic of today, is that he has been the Executive Director of the All-Ukrainian Network of people living with HIV. And we do hope that he can relate to us how his work has become so meaningful in a context that has been quite difficult. Volodymyr, the floor is yours for your presentation.
Thank you very much for introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning or good afternoon already. So last time, and especially at this conference, Ukraine is often called as a leader in Eastern Europe in response to HIV epidemic, especially in regards of the transformation of national state drug policy. I have to admit that such positive changes are especially noticeable when you are looking outside. When you are in Ukraine, that's very often seems very routine work. And I'm very proud that I have a chance to speak here on behalf of the government. And yes, I joined the government 6 months ago after 10 years working for the civil society. This transformation of my mind as well. However, I must note, while we become more effective and transparent in the implementation of new drug policy principles, the new questions and new issues are opened, and we need to find the new solution for this issue. So what Ukraine achieved in the last few years. In 2013, the government of Ukraine endorsed new state drug policy till 2020, which require cross-sectional cooperation and joint action of many ministries and departments and civil society to achieve strategic objectives as follow: reducing the demand for drug through information campaigns and introduction of the state-running prevention program, providing treatment and rehabilitation of people with drug addiction, including in the penitentiary system, preventing stigma and discrimination toward people who use drugs, control over the manufacture, sale and storage of drugs, and illicit drug trafficking. This framework document actually defined where we are and how we are planning to move ahead. National legislation now officially recognizes the importance and effectiveness of harm reduction programs, and more than 300,000 drug users benefited from the programs in all regions of Ukraine, including and our politicians, including the Vice Prime Minister who attended this conference and Minister of Health, speak loudly about the syringe and needle exchange programs, condom and lubricants distribution, and HIV counseling. Ukraine is implementing the largest program of substitution maintenance treatment, with almost 11,000 people receiving methadone or buprenorphine in nearly 200 healthcare facilities, including primary healthcare centers. Some patients may receive drugs in pharmacies for several days, and this practice becomes more popular and widespread in the country. The state acknowledges the role and influence of the people who use drugs community in the shaping state policies on drug and HIV. Thus, community representatives are active members of every working groups and have a voting seats in the country's coordination mechanism. It's really cool. And 20 years ago, when I started my career as an HIV physician, I would not believe that it would be possible in my country. Now, this is the significant changes which happened. But we honestly have to talk also about what we were not able to achieve. Unfortunately, till now, the state policy in Ukraine still remains restrictive and criminalized. A separate article in the penal code provides for criminal liability for the storage of drugs without the purpose of marketing. Despite the fact that the new National Act on Police excludes prosecution for drug use, at the same time, real practices and instruction is still changed very slowly. Therefore, the drug users continue to be incarcerated. Unfortunately, the penitentiary system continues to oppose the introduction of harm reduction programs in the closed setting, including well-recognized substitution treatment. Fear, resistance, and rejections of these best practices is a reality in which the professionals and activists work in Ukraine. Substitution maintenance therapy remain highly thresholds and inaccessible to the majority of drug users due to the barriers that arise from misunderstanding, lack of knowledge and skill, stigma and discrimination. Stigma and discrimination still persist in the healthcare setting, especially towards the key population. The Ministry of Health and the Public Health Center continue to fulfill their commitment to reduce these problems, and we are pleased that together with us, the civil society and community of people who use drugs, who live with HIV, hundreds and thousands of activists and service providers. We are planning, starting from 2019, for the first time to purchase HIV prevention package services for the state resources. And we believe that this will establish a new mechanism which ensures sustainability of such programs in the country. My 20 years of experience probably reflects the Nelson Mandela's quote, which was announced by Michel Sidibé. It is considered impossible until that happens. And our plans, our dreams will necessarily become reality. However, every next steps become more difficult. But we are ready to do this.
Thank you very much, Volodymyr. I think the story of Ukraine shows that It needs people with dedication, people coming from different backgrounds, civil society background, working in politics to push the issue. And thank you for sharing what your successes are in Ukraine, but also what still needs to be done. And so maybe later on we can hear from you what we as a crowd, as an audience, as a community can do to work with you to help make that happen. Thank you so much. Our next speaker is from Kenya. Nduku Kilonzo, she's the Chief Executive Officer of the Kenya National AIDS Council. And she's responsible for policy guidance and policy guidance and also, of course, for tracking what is happening in Kenya in terms of its HIV response. She's also the chair of the Kenya HIV Interagency Coordinating Committee and a commissioner of the IAS Lancet Commission on the future of the HIV response and global health. And I'm sure that we will be able to learn a lot from her insights. Thank you very much, Nduku, for being here.
Thank you very much, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. When I was asked to speak about sustaining HIV and AIDS as a priority. And obviously, in the thinking there, it means that we are assuming that there are other priorities to be thinking about and competing with. And that is what we have. HIV and AIDS in Kenya and in sub-Saharan Africa still remains the home of the largest burden globally. The challenges of continuing and being able to address the HIV and AIDS epidemic show that new thinking is required. Yesterday I spoke about HIV prevention being a crisis and recognizing that it is not the only crisis from a healthcare perspective. We have a growing epidemic of non-communicable diseases. We have very many other health system challenges across the countries. Therefore, this means that a greater analysis of the political dimensions of responses of HIV and AIDS need to be used to understand how and why governments should continue to focus and invest in HIV and AIDS. If a country response is to be effective, it must reflect on its own political and institutional context. It must understand the regional realities that the country has to deal with. And this is critical that the design of HIV and AIDS programs and structures are rooted in those understandings. I want to reflect briefly on my country, Kenya, what we as a National AIDS Control Council, who are responsible for being able to deliver HIV services, have been able to do. Why focus on HIV and AIDS, and particularly make it a political deliberation? I am very happy to start by saying at this International AIDS Conference, we have parliamentarians and senators from Kenya. The reason for that is very simple. It is to invite them to the global space to be able to engage, understand the issues, the challenges. As we start to think about what else is needed, I want to suggest that we in Kenya have adopted a three-pronged approach. The first approach is to be able to have the very visible engagements. And the visible engagements are focused on being able to get engagements such as the engagement of Her Excellency, the First Lady of the Republic of Kenya, who has been focused on a Beyond Zero campaign and focused on EMTCT becoming a champion. This means that there is visibility around the issue at the national and at other levels. The second, which is equally important, is perhaps a lot of the non-visible action. And this is the action that is around advocacy to ensure that there is investments, not only in the health sector, not only in the political sectors, but with technical leadership and policymakers. In Kenya, we have been able to do two things. The first is to adopt a multi-sector approach, where we have HIV, prevention of new HIV infections as a core indicator in the performance contracting service of government, which means, therefore, that every ministry and development agency of the government of Kenya must have indicators, has an indicator with a weighting of 1 out of 100 of every of the total weight that is accorded to every single agency. What that means is that, therefore, for an agency, any CEO, any cabinet secretary, to be able to achieve the maximum weighting and the maximum awards within their PC, they must invest in being able to deliver HIV and AIDS. We have been able, therefore, to provide sector-based indicators against which each ministry and development agency of government must report. And that reporting system is now, and those reports are provided on a quarterly basis with annual scorecards for ministries and development agencies. The second has been creating an enabling environment for partnerships. HIV cannot be dealt with by government alone. We have the private sector, we have civil society. And I dare say that civil society is in many different types of civil society. You have advocacy, you have local community organizations, you have the large international NGOs. And all of this must have a space around the table to negotiate, to be able to discuss, sometimes to argue, to deliberate, but importantly, for us to keep focusing on the targets. And herein lies the question around data. Yesterday in the plenary, I spoke around data systems. I invite you to go to the Kenya stand in 112 and see what we are doing with the Situation Room, which is a data dashboard where we collect data from many different agencies of government to be able to look at where we are in the HIV response. The third, an important reflection, which takes me to the third prong, has to do with counties. Kenya is a country with 47 subnational governments, or 47 semi-autonomous governments at the subnational level. Each of these governments has a budget. Each of them is expected to determine their priorities and finance those priorities. Each of these governments makes decisions on what it is that it is willing to invest in. It is therefore the role of the National AIDS Control Council to ensure that the financing arrangements, to ensure that the budget lines, and this has been done through several areas. One is being able to support the financing, what we call the chief finance officers of the counties in budget making around thinking about HIV and AIDS. And that is done because we have supported the departments of health in the counties to develop county AIDS strategic plans. The second is engaging the county assemblies. At the end of the day, financing and appropriation for resources is based on either national parliaments or county assemblies. And it is important, therefore, if you're going to retain HIV as a priority, that county assemblies and the National Assembly understand the implications of inaction and the costs that are needed. Those are the things that keep the priorities alive. And the last I want to say is being able to engage the governors. We have had a governors summit on HIV and AIDS, and we continue to engage our governors. In conclusion, as I reflect on keeping HIV and AIDS a priority, in Kenya, the HIV response, the HIV epidemic is generalized and mixed. We have a key populations epidemic in certain parts of the country. We have a generalized epidemic in various parts of the country. It therefore means that we must adopt approaches that go across board for us to be able to deliver on the HIV response, make it a priority for all government agencies, for the various political agencies, and importantly, communities must always be at the center front of pushing the boundaries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nduku, for sharing an experience on how to make sure that the HIV response is not something that is only triggered and driven at the central government level, but that it's very, very important to engage all government levels, hold them accountable, but also support them and make sure that data are available to monitor progress. And so thank you very much for making clear to us that if you really want to have an effective HIV response, you need to engage all levels and, of course, all communities. We'll talk later about how, what kind of challenges that poses, because I'm sure that there are some. Our next speaker is from South Africa. His name is Anele Yama. He's the General Secretary of the Treatment Action Campaign, has been involved in the HIV response for many, many years from different positions. He has been appointed as General Secretary a few years ago, but has been very good at the job because he has been re-elected in a second term. And so, Anele, please share with us your perspective of the situation in South Africa as you see it. Thank you very much for joining us again. The floor is yours.
Thank you, thank you. All power, all power. Amandla, Amandla. Thank you, Program Director. Comrades and friends, ladies and gentlemen, receive my warm comradely greetings this morning. MEC Dlom Dumel. I have a little task here to share with you some of the struggles that we are faced with as the poor people, not only from South Africa, but across the world. So I don't represent South Africa, I represent the millions and millions of people who are voiceless. I think one thing that all of us here we need to agree on is that health is a fundamental human right. And if that right is not realized, then the rights of the people are always violated anyway. Then, secondly, we have to agree that HIV, AIDS, and TB response does not only need a medical intervention. This is a political matter, and it should be treated as such. HIV, AIDS, and TB response has been all about social justice, human rights, constitutional rights, and the rule of the international law. When these rights are violated by our governments and other local and global institutions, as the communities, we have to stand up and organize ourselves as a solid voice to fight against such injustices and the gross violation of human rights. Let me share with you some examples from South Africa. We know that in South Africa, we had a government led by former President Thabo Mbeki and late Mando Tshabala Msimanga, who were spreading a conspiracy theory on AIDS and denialism, whilst people were dying on the ground. What we had to do was to mobilize people, more especially people living with HIV and AIDS, make them understand what is HIV, what are the opportunistic infections, what are sexually transmitted infections, symptoms, and the effective treatment to that. And to our surprise, there were no medicines available in our healthcare facilities. In many instances, for instance, if someone living with HIV and AIDS is developing shingles, you go to the clinic, you will be given calamine. If you are HIV positive, you go to the clinic, maybe let's say you've got a cryptococcal meningitis, you get to the clinic, you are given Panado. And then we said, no. Through treatment literacy, communities were able to have an informed information so that when they go to clinics and are given calamine, they will be know the effective treatment for shingles is not calamine, we demand acyclovir. When they go to facilities with cryptococcal meningitis and are given Panado, we'll be like, no. We don't want a Panado. We want fluconazole or diflucan. By doing so, we created a demand by putting pressure to our government to make sure that effective medicines are available within the clinics. And on top of that, we had to put pressure to pharmaceutical companies who keeps on making profit out of the lives of the poor people. we had to challenge Pfizer to say, we want fluconazole now. We had to break the law because our government was not listening to us then. We had to break the law. We sent a delegation outside South Africa to bring the generic drugs to South Africa by force so that we can make it available to poor people. But also, we had to engage pharmaceutical companies until they managed to reduce some of the prices for HIV treatment. We, as I have said, in that process, when our government was not providing a treatment to the people, we had to go to the streets to mobilize and organize ourselves. 2, we had to embark on a civil disobedience to break all the unjust laws until our constitutional rights are met. And 3, we had to take our struggle to the courts of laws. Because if health is a fundamental human right, and any government in the world is denying people that right, it means those governments are breaking the law. Then if they are breaking the law, we have to take the matter to the courts of law so that the courts of law can come to the rescue of the voiceless majority of the people. But on top of that, we had to go and rally the trade unions, ordinary citizens, medical doctors, researchers, scientists, and clinicians, so that whatever that we are advocating for, we know that it is informed by science and it is within the confines of the law. Where are we now in South Africa? As I'm standing here today in South Africa, we have about 4.2 million people who are on antiretrovirals. Today in South Africa, we have NSP on HIV, National Strategic Plan on HIV, AIDS, and TB response. 3, today in South Africa, we have a bill on intellectual property rights and patent laws. As I'm standing here, in South Africa, we have a bill on national insurance. We have a bill on medical schemes. Also, as I'm talking here, the Office of the President of South Africa is organizing a national health summit that is going to include both government, business, and civil society, because the healthcare system of South Africa is broken and it is continuously failing the majority of the poor people. So, if it was not because of the political pressure from the activists on the ground and everybody, we could not have achieved all what I have mentioned above. We have all these achievements. It is because of the power of the people. The people were able to claim back their power. Because we as the people, we are the ones who have the power. We are the ones who vote politicians into power. So when things are not happening right, it becomes our responsibility as the people to take back the power, to reclaim the power. Lastly, if we are saying health is a fundamental human right, if we are saying HIV, AIDS, and TB response is all about social justice, human rights, upholding constitutional rights of the people, as well as the international laws, let us all agree from this AIDS conference that 2020 AIDS conference cannot be held in the USA as long as Donald Trump is the head of state there. Let's get out of this hole. Tell the World Health Organization, tell the Global Fund, International AIDS Society, everybody, including our governments, as to say, if they respect the law, we cannot go to USA because the regime of Donald Trump is not different from the apartheid regime of South Africa. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Anele, not only for the call in the last minutes of your speech, but also for being very clear on what the role of the people is in making sure that the right things happen. And so this is, I think, one of the issues that I wanted to discuss with also the others in the panel, looking at it from a perspective of a politician. Sometimes you do the right things because this is who you are. I'm looking at Helena here. And also because your political party is the one that is pushing you. Sometimes you have to fight very hard and you need the support of civil society to help you push the issue. And so I'd like to make a round of remarks on that issue with you, following up on what you've been saying. And specifically maybe starting with Volodymyr. You've come from civil society perspective. You moved into government. And so what is your reflection on how the two need to work together, or sometimes you need to be in a confrontational mode as civil society? How has that been working out for you as a person, as an activist and a politician in the context that you're working in? I think talk and then they will pick it up.
Okay. So it's quite complicated questions because specifically for my country, we passed through the several different periods of the work with the government, starting from the fighting with the previous regimes, which was kicked out from the country, and now with the close collaboration with the current government. But all this environment are established by people, and I absolutely agree with my colleague from South Africa that without people, without the person who lead all this process, probably any changes will be impossible. So my experience, which I learned in the civil society, do not afraid. You can speak loudly, you can speak out for any problems, and we would like to bring it to the current government system. Just to start speak out and discuss the issue. When we will negotiate it, this will solve many of the problems. And I recognize the role of the civil society because in Ukraine, civil society playing significant role in the political changes. Even the revolution of dignity is starting because of the protest from the civil society. And this changing of mind and the development of the new political institution, state institution, new relationship probably will help us to look at the future with the perspective. And yes, we are doing that for people, and we should do it for people.
Thank you very much. Nduku, I know Kenya has a very vibrant civil society, very dynamic, very outspoken. And how have you been relating from where you sit with civil society? How have they been helpful in making sure that politicians are accountable and that they are able to do the right thing?
So thanks. I think let me start by saying that when we think about civil society, I'm not sure that it isn't usually really many different people who move in different positions because it's a fluid space, in the sense that today someone who is an advocate in the community tomorrow will be a member of parliament or will be in government such as myself, or will be and so I think the first realization is that this dichotomy is not fixed. There is people who transit in different ways. And that creates an opportunity for partnerships and champions within the different spaces across board. Having said that, with regard to the government's engagement, and particularly the National AIDS Control Council of Kenya with civil society, we actually do have a very vibrant engagement. And now, a vibrant engagement does not mean consensus all the time, and it does not mean agreeing all the time. It means that there will be times when there will be different positions. It means that sometimes those different positions will actually become tensions, and sometimes they will be deliberated and agreed on the table. But I think the most important thing is not the idea, because I think if we all came from the same space in the same way all the time, I'm not sure that would be a healthy thing either. I think the most important thing is twofold. One, is the question of being able to recognize issue by issue that people will take different stands. So is it people or different groups of people will take different stands? So today we'll be in partnership with civil society around something to do with private sector. Tomorrow I'll be in partnership with private sector, with civil society on the other side. And the day after it will be government and civil society, because it depends on the issue. And I think if we realize that and we take that as part of what we have to do to keep pushing the boundaries and to keep moving forward, we will be able to achieve much more than trying to suggest that there is a static nature in the way in which we engage in the response. It is not static, it is issue-based. It will always be, especially if you have a healthy relationship where there is independence, yet at the same time a lot of mutual collaboration and partnership. So the one thing that I find most important is that, one, the partnerships actually have a defined space of operating. It becomes very tenuous if there isn't a place where people can sit and agree to disagree or agree to agree. And that, I think, is where the role of the NAC sits, in being able to enhance spaces within working groups, spaces where there will be a pushback from civil society, from the private sector, and so on and so forth. The second thing that I think is really key in ensuring that this works is understanding that the roles and mandates of each of these different constituencies are different. The roles and mandate of government will always be different from those of civil society. And there will always be the need for civil society to keep pushing in whichever form. And this is not just HIV, it is almost in everything. But on the other hand, there is a role and mandate of government as duty bearer to be able to say, to set policies, to set standards, to set guidelines, because that is really what governments are. They are duty bearers. So, and it is that understanding that is key and important in pushing things forward, that there is a mandate, but there is a space where we all express each other, but those mandates must continue to be fulfilled.
Thank you very much. Helena, you have been speaking from your experience as a minister, pushing issues where you know that also in your community, in Maltese society, is some resistance, which could be an understatement. And so how has been in Malta, how has the dynamic between civil society and your agenda, how did that play out?
I will continue on what you were saying. And by the way, I liked your phrase, the revolution of dignity. I think it's a wonderful phrase. And that is what it's all about, really, the dignity of persons, of every person, of every human being. But to get to your question, of course, there is always tension and there is always conflict in society. Some say that conflict actually makes that society functional. So if you were to look from a sociological perspective, the conflicts will always be there on people who agree, on people who disagree. But on this matter, I don't agree that what the majority say will win the day, because we are talking about minorities here. Okay, so if I have 80% of people who are against, for example, civil unions, as was the case in my country before we started this dignity revolution, to call it that way, had we to say that, listen, okay, so 80% of the people are against, we are a democracy, and so we don't do anything, that would be a tyranny of the majority. It would not be politics in the way politics should be, in the sense that to improve the lives of people. We are not saying to improve the lives of the majority. We are saying to improve the lives of people, of all people, of every child who was born, however she or he is born, whatever her life situation, whatever his life chances. You know, so a government is there for everyone. So once we went ahead with this, putting the tensions aside and saying and explaining to the detractors, explaining to the church, explaining to the opposition party, explaining to the conservative groups who were making their voices heard. And we were saying, what's wrong with giving minorities their rights? What's wrong with giving them the right to live a decent life, to reach their full potential without any laws discriminating against them and thus serving as hurdles for them to progress in society? Some understood, some insisted in their own ways, but we went along as a government, not arrogantly, not because we had a strong majority, but because we believed that it was the right thing to do, irrelevant of what some people were saying. When the following year we came to, as I said when I was speaking, to the bill on gender identity and rights for gender affirmation and all that, you know, there was no discussion, very little discussion, because they learned from the previous year that even though we went along and we introduced civil unions, the sky did not fall, and everybody went on with their lives, with the difference that there was a minority group which was living a better life. So what's not to like? What's there to criticize in this? And from then on, we continued. We even had issues recently when we were strengthening our IVF law. Like there were groups, even the opposition, who were they were not agreeing with embryo freezing and all that. And I told them, speak to the infertile couples and listen to their stories and see how can you deny these people their right to have a child, their right to procreate, their right to have a family. You know, so really, most of the times we are dealing with minorities, and most of the time there are many people against because it doesn't affect their lives, because it's not about them. But a government can't seek to be popular and go with the flow of the majority. We can't have that. Because if we go with the flow of the majority, if we want to be popular, then we are there for ourselves, not for the people who really need us.
Thank you very much, Helena, for also reminding us what real and true democracy is about. Anele, you've been speaking about your experience dealing with different governments in South Africa in the last few years. And I seem to recall that you said that now with the current president, you are working with the office of the president also. How have you been able to balance, let me say, the need to confront and the need to dialogue with those different governments? Could you say a few words about that?
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll work.
Point of correction. I never said we are working with the office of the president, but on the issue of the Health Summit, but we've got a president now who is listening to the people.
Yeah. Yep.
But also, that didn't come on a silver platter. Yeah. It was through the anger, the action, and some other interventions until we were listened to. But also, we need to understand here that in any society, a group in power will never, ever on earth voluntarily relinquish its position. It must always be forced to do so. And in that process, we need to understand the class interest and the class contradictions. So, If a government claims to be the government of the people, that government must listen to the people. If that government does not listen to the people, it therefore means that government is no longer the government of the people. Then what must people do? They must put pressure. That's why we call ourselves activists. We can Google what does activist mean. We are fighting for both political and social change. And if our government does not listen to us, because we must not also run away from the fact that in some of our countries, we do have unjust laws. Like from where I come from in South Africa, we've got Section 12 of the Gatherings Act. That is unjust law. We've got Land Act of 1913, where the land of the black people was taken by force from them. Then when we say we want our land back, we will be delayed. But let's come here. Here, what we are talking about, one of the things we did, we made sure that whatever that we are doing as activists, it is within the confines of the law. Since 20 years ago, when our movement was formed, as much as we embarked on civil disobedience, but we were resolute on one issue, that if we want access to quality health care services and we are angry, we are right to be angry. But it will be wrong for us to vent our anger by banning state institutions and all what have you. Because at the end of the day, as the citizens, we are the same people who will need to use these institutions. So if we are angry, let's use our power by taking it to the streets, by using the rule of the law. And we have achieved a lot of battles by taking it to the streets and also by using the rule of the law. Lastly, as Comrade Ernesto Che Guevara said, that he is not the liberator, but the liberator is the people. The people are their own liberators. It is against that background, always when we embark on social mobilization, we make sure that we empower communities for them to know their constitutional rights, for them to know where services are and what they must do when these services are not provided, so that they can be able to pick up their own struggles at local level and run with them. Thanks.
Thanks, yeah. I'd like to pose one more question to you all, and then I will turn to the hall if there are any questions there. Just to help us and the audience and the people that are reflecting on this meeting later on, just to help them make sure that they benefit from your experience. I just wanted to ask you, what would be your 2 key lessons, looking back at your struggle from your different positions, that you want to share with others? Helena, can I start with you?
Yes. I think what is of the essence is social dialogue, of reaching out to people who are disagreeing with you and explaining what you are doing. They might in the end, say, maybe you are right. They might still continue to disagree, but at the back of their minds, they know that you really mean to change the lives of people. They will understand that, even though they continue in their minds, maybe through no fault of their own. Maybe it's because of the way they were brought up. Maybe it's because of their prejudices. Maybe it's because of their conservative outlook on life. So I try to put myself in their place and try to understand their position. And I tell them to put themselves in the place of the lives of people we are trying to help and change, and walk a few paces in those shoes, in the shoes of the trans person who cannot live a normal life without having to undergo reassignment surgery, for instance. That is something which we did. You don't have to undergo reassignment surgery, which is very expensive and very risky, to have your official documentation changed. So now trans people have the documentation, the official documentation, their ID card, their passports, which reflect the gender which they identify with and not their biological gender, even though they don't undergo surgery. So now they are living a better life. So when you explain to these detractors, to these people who are not agreeing with you, they know at the back of your minds that you are really improving the lives of these minorities, really. So social dialogue is key. In fact, before I embarked on all the legislation, I had long talks with the church, talks with the opposition party. In the end, they said, okay, we don't agree, but we will let you carry on, or we will not. There were others who were vociferous until the end. But then you're the government and you have to legislate and you carry on. But I think that social dialogue is of the essence, because eventually they will know, and in their heart of hearts, they know that what you are doing is good.
Thank you. Thanks. Volodymyr, yeah.
So I already shared several lessons from my experience, but what I would add to what Minister said, that I believe that the personal motivation is the main driving force for any changes. And that is the examples from South Africa or Ukraine or Malta. That's always driven by people, by person. From my experience, when I enter to the civil society from the government and back, I'm observing how my colleagues in civil society growing from their experience, their knowledge, their expertise. And they are probably the most prominent activists in Ukraine right now. And they are starting as drug users, former drug users, and nobody believed that they could change something. This is like a personal motivation to change themselves and to change the world. Help us to open the door which was closed, to change the law which was not acceptable, to ensure the care for 100,000 people in Ukraine. And this is because of personal motivation. I think this is one of the most important lessons we learn from HIV response throughout the world.
Thank you very much. Nduku, from your experience, what would be the one or two lessons that you'd like to share? And could you say maybe a bit more on the way that you've been working with the local governments, because I think that's also quite relevant for policymakers.
So, thank you. Let me first start by sharing one experience, one challenge, and then I'll talk about local government. And the challenge I want to share is perhaps a challenge that for many agencies that are NACS or are required to work in a multi-sector sort of perspective have. And that is balancing the different needs, priorities across different constituencies. So we engage with civil society, the NAC who advise the government on matters HIV and AIDS, who engage with the private sector, who engage with donors, and sometimes you being a duty bearer, you have to negotiate all of these different spaces, yet focus on the fact that as a country, we really must all work towards the targets that we have. And that doesn't always mean that we will move in the same direction or we will agree on things. And so I think that balancing act is part of the hardest. And then at the same time, being able to use all those resources to continue to mobilize the political will to keep HIV a priority. The second, I think, coming to your second question around working with the counties and the county governments in Kenya, first, we were recently devolved. So we are not a country that has had devolution for a very long time. It has been in the last about 7 or so years. And that has meant that everyone has been in a very quick learning phase. The key things that I have learned is that as an agency of the national government, our role is around providing technical support. Our second role is around engaging with non-state actors, whether civil society or private sector, and providing them with guidance about how best also to engage and what are the opportunities to engage with local governments. And the reason for that is that it therefore allows that the engagement at the various subnational levels or county governments is much richer and also much more clear around for the different constituencies. And I think the third and most important is respecting the fact that county governments do have interests of trying to achieve the targets that have been agreed on. It might not always be achieved in the way that we think it should be achieved. It may not always be what we would be advising, but that interest is there. And so it is important, once that is recognized, to support the idea of what are your key strategies, what will make most sense, how do you need to do it? And sometimes that is not always the easiest. For the NAC, part of what we do is therefore engage with those other constituencies that help the health department's work, like the county assemblies, like the county finance departments, which are not necessarily linked directly to the health department, but as a national agency we can. And be able to say, you know, these are the targets, this is what we would propose, this is how much is available in your county from donors and partners, and therefore this is where your primary gap is, and keeping on providing that information. But at the end of the day, you have capacity, you have engagement, and it is about how you help mobilize that to harness the results that are being looked for. I think that's the most important thing with county governments.
Thank you very much. Anele, your lessons that you'd like to share with us, with activists, government officials, you go.
One, the principle must be to say, from the people to the government and from government to the people. Mm-hmm. Nothing about us without us. So it means government must stop taking decisions on our behalf and come to communities to impose. That is wrong. You need to consult the people. If we're talking about the will of the people, it means you must listen to the people, take whatever what the people want and be able to implement it. Two, it is about the respect for the rule of the law and the constitution. If you respect the rule of the law, it can't be true that our governments are immune to this. We've got issues of corruption where some politicians are stealing from the public purse. They are looting to feed their friends and families. We need to challenge those because that money is meant for services. Yeah. And if these politicians keeps on stealing from the public, we need to use the courts of law so that they are arrested as criminals. We can't run away from that. Yeah. But lastly, it will be wrong for all of us to think that by the mere fact that we've got a plan in a nice paper, we think that all is well. We don't want plans. We want action. Yeah. So you can have nice plans, but if there is no action, then you are not serving the interests of the people. Yeah. Last.
Thank you. You go. Yeah.
We've got government officials. Some of them are lazy, some of them are deadwoods. Like MEC Dlomo will agree with me. We are no longer writing letters to the minister or the MEC to organize appointments. We call the MEC and the minister direct because some of the officials, we write letters to the MEC. The MEC does not get the letter. The minister does not get the letter. And whom are we blaming? The political head. Yeah. When our political leaders are going to chase out of the offices all these deadwoods who are not serving the people, until such time we get rid of all these lazy people that are hired by our government and who are not delivering to the people. It's only then that we can be able to see services going to the people. Thanks.
Thank you very much, all of you. It was a quite rich series of recommendations that I think are a true call for action. And I mean, Helena was speaking about social dialogue. Anele was speaking about nothing about us without us, which is basically different sizes of the same coin. And Volodymyr was talking about how important it is to open doors that are closed, and sometimes you have to push, because on the other side there's a big push too, and not sit back but continue the fight. Ndudu, thank you very much. Nduku, thank you very much for laying out how important it is that you need to have a conversation on how to balance priorities. It's all well and good to say you should do this and you should do that, but in reality on the ground, resources are limited, and you have to be able to have a dialogue on how you make sure that those different priorities are balanced according to the need of the people. So I know you said much more, but this is for me now a kind of takeaway. Now I think it would be good if there are some questions from the audience. Now I have, there's like only 3 rules. You have to walk up to the microphone. If you're not able to, you should signal. Secondly, please say who you are and who you would like to address your question to. We take maybe 2 questions at a time and hope to be able to give the floor to all of you. Now, you were first, so please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. My name is Esther Mbayo from Uganda, and my question and observation is directed to Helena. I appreciate the fact that we all come from communities with different cultures, values, and norms, and later on, different laws and the policies that back up our cultures for better implementation. And I appreciate the fact that some of the actions, behaviors, lifestyle of certain key categories of the key population have negative impact on our culture. Now my question is, who would lose if, for example, Uganda was left to exercise its laws and policies and at the same time adhering to its cultures and at the same time be assisted unconditionally? Who would lose? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm turning to you for the second question. You go.
All right, thank you very much. James Karongo from Kenya. My question is directed to the Minister and Dr. Nduku Kilonzo. I've mentioned about the different activities and the different policies and laws. I'd like to hear, how have you been able to secure funding for the response, and in terms of the political support, in terms of funding for the HIV response? Thank you.
Thank you. Helena, I think the call was first to you from Esther, from Uganda.
Yes, if I understood you correctly, you said majority, negative impact on the majority. No, but that's not what I said. I said that a majority might be against what we are doing. It's not that what we are doing is going to have a negative impact on the majority. In fact, after we introduced certain laws, people realized, even those who were against such laws, realized that nothing really changed, nothing actually changed for them, because what we were doing did not affect them directly. It affects them as a society, because the more rights, I mean, there is equality, there isn't a limitation which you can put to equality. There is equality for everyone. And that is what people are realizing now that we went ahead with our various legislation, even legislation which some people, and in some cases, a majority was against. But it's not a negative impact on the majority, as absolutely not. In fact, our society is better, is richer, because we are respecting diversity, and we are using, now this is the economic argument,
Yeah.
Now we are using more of our human resource potential. Malta has no natural resources. We only have human resources. And we were wasting some of those resources because of our discrimination on certain sectors of our society, legal discrimination, I'm saying now. Now because we have opened up and there is less discrimination, I would like to say no discrimination, but we haven't come to that, but let's say we have less discrimination, so the impact is positive on the whole of society, even on those people who were against these changes. I don't know whether I've answered your question, but regarding funding, yes, it's good to be in cabinet where the health minister is present and where I make my case, for instance, on the case of gender reassignment surgery, which we are working on to start making free of charge also, although we have already legislated for those who don't want to undergo surgery to live an easier life than they had up to now. But even with medication for people with the HIV condition and all that. So you really must, dialogue and explain to other ministers, to the finance minister, to the health minister, and say, listen, we need funding for this. And when they understand that you have a very good case, that there are, and also cases of discrimination, I would say, because let's take the trans example. If a person is born trans, he or she is born trans through no choice of her own. But if I drink a lot of alcohol and I damage my liver to the extent that I need a transplant, automatically our NHS gives you a liver transplant free of charge. I'm not saying that we should pay for this. It is good that you get that. But a trans person hasn't chosen this upon herself, or she became trans because of drinking alcohol or of some other thing which she did, which she shouldn't have been doing. So this was my argument with the health minister. So if we provide health services for people, even for people who bring the disease upon themselves, so how can we say that we don't give a free health service to a person who was born trans and needs this surgery? Okay, so you have to really make these arguments in places where it matters, such as cabinet, where, again, you need to convince the finance minister, you need to convince the health minister that you need a portion of the budget for that.
Thank you very much. I think that was very helpful for all of us who need to engage in those arguments, to have the examples that you stated. Nduku, the question of the budget and the resources was obviously also directed to you. Could you reflect on the question?
I think the way I want to start by saying it is that part of the current, what we have seen as the political engagement has resulted in significant increases. Over the last 3 to 4 years, we've had more than a 30% budget increase allocation from Treasury for HIV and AIDS specifically. And the figures are available in our annual reports. The second item has to do with the broader long-term sustainability. We still have a significant reliance on external funding. And the question, therefore, is what are the opportunities for us? And I think the opportunity lies in universal health coverage in the context of ensuring that the benefits package that is provided by the government includes HIV and related services, whether it is ART, whether it is testing services, whether it is condoms. This is where I think the action needs to be, both in terms of advocacy, in terms of advisory, in terms of whatever action that we need to take to ensure that we are moving to a benefits package that supports the services that have to be. And why I say that is because even when you think about the person living with HIV, for instance, if you're thinking about treatment, because that is the biggest cost, you want that person, when they go to a facility, to be able to get every service, whether it is that they're suffering from an NCD, or they have a headache, or they are going for their HIV medication, or their viral load testing. You want that to be covered as part of the standard package, and rather than being a separate funding stream. So I think here it is the opportunity of the challenge of recognizing that funding is not going to continue as is. Probably we've had that a lot. We have seen declines over the last few years, and recognizing that therefore where are the opportunities in country, and how do we harness them to the best possible way.
Thank you. Yeah, you can add, of course.
Yeah, can I add a few issues? Because when I turn to the government and start to manage governmental money, that was very interesting story, because I learned that there are a lot of money within the governmental budget which is not spent properly. And Ukraine is one of the examples, because in 2014 we switched, for example, to the international procurement of ARV, and which give us 40% saving because of decreasing of price. And this is absolutely practical way. And our neighboring countries in Eastern Europe start to use the same approaches. So this additional 40% will give us possibility to cover the new needs for the treatment, but also starting from 2019 we'll start to procure the prevention services. So money is within the budget. So probably we need to evaluate and understand whether we will use it properly or not. Whether the people consider this as a real benefit for them, or we just, because, for example, another story, the Ukrainian Ministry of Health covers a lot of admission to the physician without proper needs. Now, when we switch it to a targeted prevention, targeted intervention, this is more effective and more useful. So there is a boss issue, but I believe that there is some windows for and opportunities within the current budget as well.
Well, thank you very much for pointing out that when you're in the government, you also have a responsibility to make sure that the funding is used for the right purposes. This is not something only for Parliament or activists or citizens, but also when you're within the government, you have that responsibility. Thank you. Sir, and then I'll go to you. But first you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm Sbongsen Dlomo from KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa. One is to commend the politician, the minister, for the good work that she's doing there. But I'm just thinking, as South Africa, there's so many things that we probably would still learn from Kenya. I think we need to really sit down and learn. There's so many good stories there I think I'm picking up. But one question to the speaker from Ukraine. Now that you've moved out of the activism in the civil society and in government, have you lost the flavor to push on, or you are doing that better or more than that? My comment to Anel is that we need to actually respect and understand that South Africans are a very forgiving society, because at the time things were not happening right, and now that things are okay, we are working well. Yeah. And Anele mentioned that we have 4.2 million South Africans who are currently on treatment. Would want to actually say we will be with him in the next month, because the president is going to launch another screening campaign for 14 million South Africans, with the hope of getting 2 more million South Africans on treatment, because we now know that if you put people on treatment, they live longer and they are available for their societies, and you don't have to actually worry as government. But coupled with that, we'll also be screening for hypertension and diabetes, because that also is becoming a challenge in our country. I'm sure and I'm aware that Anele will be with us in those campaigns, and if we have not been able to announce that at home, I am now officially announcing we'll be together there.
Thank you. Thank you. So in the interest of time, I take all four, there's 3 remaining questions. We take them in one go, and then we can all respond. So you go, and then I'll come to you.
Hello, my name is Inès Echir from Groupe SIDA Genève, who's a Swiss organization. My question was mostly directed to Madame Dali, but I think all of you might have something interesting to say about this. So this thing is that I wanted to have a free advice. Us in Switzerland, we have this thing called direct democracy, where the people vote directly on the law projects, referendums, initiative, etc. So the problem that we have is that very often the people vote against their own interest. And it's not about a majority not wanting a minority to rise. It's even worse, it's about a majority voting against their own interest and then scapegoating the minority. And the political mobilization becomes very hard and very tricky. And as an organization where we fight for a minority issue, but where we see the interest of the majority to expand, for example, universal health coverage, who was repelled by vote less than 2 years ago, how can we work towards the majority not falling for the conservatism that tell them the simple ways to scapegoat the minorities?
Thank you, which is the question of the day, I think. The 2 gentlemen over there.
Thank you. Mark Josef Rapp of Standard Publications. I'm actually Maltese, so I'm actually quite happy to have Minister Dale.
Well, you should be, yeah. Well, you go.
My questions are I'm going to try to be as straight and concrete as much as possible. I'm very thrilled to hear that HIV is going to be in the LGBTQI action plan. What I would like to ask is, when is the time that the action plan will be actually implemented? Because we can know that action plans can go on for months and years. And meanwhile, what research I've currently conducted is that people in Malta living with HIV are being prescribed medication which has been out of the guidelines for at least the last 2 EX guidelines. Most of them are taking 4 to 6 tablets a day, and even though generics of 3 drugs in 1 tablet have already been approved and can be introduced in Malta. So when shall we be expected to see that this treatment becomes available? Secondly,
you should be a little bit more brief now for your second question.
The second part is, are there any ideas or plans to introduce harm reduction programs? We've mentioned LGBT as a key population, but what about harm reduction programs? And ultimately, when will the PrEP trial, on when will it be introduced, and why are we waiting to make PEP for free? PEP costs €580 for a month. How can a 15, 16, 18-year-old afford that amount of money?
You've made your point. Thanks. Those were actually 3 questions, but I'm in a very good mood today. So if you could have one, that would be nice.
My name is Daniel. I come from Kenya. I have a question to the gentleman from South Africa. Thank you for your passion and the presentation. But as an outsider and what we are hearing coming out of South Africa in terms of best practice, reduction on deaths, reduced new infections, I have been wondering, how can the treatment action campaign align itself to the good stories that are coming from South Africa, and also, talk about that, help to inspire other countries as well. But also, I have a question for you on SDGs and mainstreaming of HIV/AIDS integration into the SDGs. What's your view when it comes to ending AIDS in 2030? Would you have a voice on that, and what is your take on it?
Thank you very much. So I'll give the floor to each and every one of you for a couple of minutes. And let me start with Andele this time.
Thanks. I think, without wasting your time, Program Director,
Thanks.
as TAC, as I said, that we are a mass movement. All the achievements that we have in South Africa now cannot be attributed to a single entity. It was a collective effort. Civil society played its role. Researchers, clinicians, and all what have you played their role. The lawyers and the courts of law played their role. And the government played its role. So whatever we see happening in South Africa is a collective achievement. But it will be wrong for our government not to mention the role of civil society in those achievements. Ending AIDS by 1990, a simple answer, my brother, that is a myth and a lie. As long as the public healthcare system is broken, as long as only those who have access to quality healthcare services are those who can afford, and the poor people are left out, let's not talk about an end to AIDS. As I'm sitting here, we just received a report released by Human Science Research Council, which tells us that every day in South Africa, there is an estimated number of new infection of about 600. As I'm sitting here, in Eastern Cape last year, Eastern Cape is one of the provinces. They gave a report where it was indicating that in Eastern Cape, people living with HIV and AIDS are estimated to 700,000. About 400,000 were on ARVs, and the other 300,000 is not on ARVs. Out of the 400,000 that is on ARVs, are lost 75,000 is lost on follow-ups. So it should not be about the number of people we have initiated. It should be about the quality of the program. There is no one that needs to be left out. So if we want to end AIDS, let's make sure that we fix the broken public healthcare system through the universal health coverage. Let's have more doctors. Let's have more nurses. Let's fix our facilities so that when people go to those facilities are not chased out of the facility because of the attitude of the nurses. People, when they go to facilities, are turned away because of the shortage of medicines. Lastly, one of the provinces in Northwest, while it was on strike for 3 months, the whole province was on political uprising. And for 3 months, there were no services provided to the people, including healthcare services. What do we say about those people who were made by the system to default on treatment? So let's not talk about an end to AIDS. Let's talk about how do we fix the broken public healthcare system. I thank you.
Thank you. My dear friends, I got word that we need to clear the hall because obviously the program will continue. So there will not be an opportunity for the other panelists to come back again to the questions that that were posed to them, but they very kindly agreed that they will be outside the hall for a few minutes to talk to you if you would like to do that. So thank you very much for all of that. I would like to thank the audience for your attention, for your questions. I would like to thank each and every one of you for sharing your story, not only in, let me say, a professional and technical way, but to really answer the questions and reflect on the issue from your personal point of view, because I think it's really true what you said, Vladimir, that it really needs people to push the issue, and that would be the major lesson of the day, and you are one of those people, all four of you, who have been able to do so. So thank you very much for that. Thank you, and have a good conference.